Good evening. My name is Asad Lalji. I'm the CEO of Avid Learning. Research by the International Crops Research Institute for Semi-Arid Tropics shows that 65 to 85% of Indian districts growing key crops such as maize, chickpea, pigeon pea, sesame have already experienced high production instability due to climate variability. As climate pressures intensify, they're reshaping agricultural practices, supply chains, diets, while also opening new pathways for innovation from climate-smart agriculture and indigenous crops to urban farming and emerging agri-tech solutions. With these words, I'd like to welcome you to Edible Futures, Tasting Tomorrow in a Warming World, presented in collaboration with the National Gallery of Modern Art, Mumbai, the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, and Project Mumbai in partnership with the Government of Maharashtra, Department of Environment and Climate Change, and supported by the BMC. This is also the third program in our series leading up to Climate Week, scheduled for February 17th to 19th, India's first dedicated platform to accelerate climate action, helping Mumbai, India, and the Global South shape citizen-driven solutions. And before I begin, I'd like to thank Ms. Nidhi Chaudhary, Director of the NGMA Mumbai, Deputy Curator Shruti Das for hosting us this evening, and for their continued commitment to using cultural spaces at platforms for critical climate conversations. I'd also like to thank Professor Chalagur and Professor Vaidya from the TIFR for their ongoing collaboration, Shishir Joshi from Project Mumbai. Tonight's conversation brings together a distinguished group of speakers working across land stewardship, public policy, media, food system innovation, from indigenous knowledge systems to scalable agri-tech interventions. Our speakers will share insights and best practices for nourishing people in a warm world. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speakers, proprietor and steward of the land, Vrindavan Farms, Gayatri Bhatia. Former Additional Chief Secretary, Agriculture and Marketing, Government of Maharashtra, Dr. Sudhir Kumar Goyal. Founder and Director, Goya Media, Anisha Rachel Oman. And our moderator for the evening, Managing Director, Good Foods Institute India, Sneha Singh. Look forward to a thought-provoking conversation. Thank you all for being here. I know it's a tough time in the day, but I appreciate you being here. Thank you, and over to you, Sneha.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for making time this evening for this very important and urgent conversation, and thank you to the panel as well. I come from a mixture in terms of my background. I've done over a decade in climate, nature conservation, urban nature conservation, and now food systems. Every year, every UNEP report, every IPCC report, and we are just thinking about, all right, what are the solutions? How can we change this? What can we do differently? I have a fondness for stats, and so I will anchor us in some data. Please don't get bored, and forgive me if it's too much. But overall, agriculture remains the second largest contributor to India's GHG emissions. So that's about 13.7% of total emissions, which is not a small number. In fact, the World Bank's Recipe for a Livable Planet report has a really cool statistic, which says that if we examine 26 of the most promising emission mitigation interventions across agriculture, forests, and food, it ranks afforestation and reforestation as the first intervention that we should all be doing. So yes, planting more trees, planting more forests. And the next one, it says, is alternative proteins when it comes to climate mitigation potential, which is equivalent to 6 times of eliminating air travel worldwide. More impactful than what is the second most promising livestock-based intervention. And also, India is one of the top emitters when it comes to methane. The shift away from our current food system towards consuming differently in a warmer world, as Asad mentioned is something that we should all be thinking about. So with that, I will start with Gayatri. You've got nearly 2 decades working closely with land, people, local ecologies, and privileging slowness and observation as strengths that you steward. That lens, I think, is really vital when a conversation about scale and speed risks what local systems can actually teach about resilience. So I'd love to hear from you when you think about how food innovation is happening in the world. What is the first signal to you ecologically that tells you that something's breaking in the climate?
Hi, everyone. So Sneha, great question. And I think it's worth pointing out that the climate isn't breaking per se, because history is filled with examples of climatic dissonance. What is very true is that the familiar rhythm is changing. And what I mean by this is seasons have become more erratic, seasons have become more intense, and the transition between seasons is almost non-existent sometimes. I'll take us to a moment on the farm, and moments on the farm are typically very slow. I see an elderly tribal lady. She's sitting underneath the shade of a mahua tree, and she's watching her buffalo graze on the wild grass. I go up to her, sit beside her, and ask her, what do you think about the monsoon? And the background is that we've all been waiting for the rain. We've all been waiting to sow our seeds of millet and rice. And she shrugs and looks at me. She turns, pointing southwest, and gestures that sometimes it came from there. It used to always come from there. And not so much. It's not so predictable anymore. Sometimes it comes from behind. She points east. And sometimes it shows up with a bang. And the thing we must appreciate with agriculture is that we need this transition period for us to sow. If seasons show up with a bang, it freezes the sowing period. And in farming, there's a very small optimal window for us to be able to sow. You miss that, you're going to wait 360 days for the next perfect moment to sow. So what are these dissonances that I'm observing myself? In 2020, in the last year, we had summer that went up to 40 degrees Celsius. This scorched the leaves of the mango trees, the canopy leaves. Mango is a tropical tree, guys. In the winter of 2024, the winter was so warm that the trees didn't get the message to stop their vegetative growth. So you need the cold to trigger from vegetative growth to flowering. And the trees didn't get that message, which meant we didn't have a crop of mango across Maharashtra. We had a really dismal crop across Maharashtra. In the 2022 October, we didn't have an October heat. And October heat is what farmers need to be able to sow the greens, the palak, methi, the mooli, the underground crops, the potatoes, onions, and we didn't have that. We went straight from monsoon into winter. 2024 monsoon was so erratic, it was so fragmented that it was pouring in my village, and the next village over was bone dry. And last monsoon was probably the most interesting. We had rain that started on the 25th of May, and it ended. The last day of monsoon for us was 5th of November. That's almost 5 months of monsoon. What this did is birth a really dark joke in the farming community, the paddy farmers, that we don't need to sow for next year. And what that actually meant was paddy, for those of you who are not familiar, it's the rice grows on a grass, and at the top of this grass are the seeds of rice. So what happened with this intense rain is the farmers' grass lodged, the paddy lodged, and a lot of seed was sitting waterlogged. I have seen farmers along the Konkan belt cut their grass, carry this wet paddy, which is pretty labor intensive, and paddy by itself is a laborious effort. But this is an added step. You carry this wet paddy, and they were carrying it to hillocks, to bunds. I saw it along the side of the highways, in the medians of the highways, to be able to dry. So yes, the irregularity is real. We're feeling it. Yeah. It's changed our seasons. It's changed something that we as farmers were familiar with, the one variable we as farmers kind of depended on.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. And I think that's being felt across the board when it comes to, if you listen to farmers and their stories. And I think Dr. Goyal has worked in agri-value chains, sir, as a part of the government, and you've led integrated agri-value chain work as a part of your work in Maharashtra. You've built bridges between markets and farmers and governments, and the exact levers that people need to move from like pilot to large scale, and what does that journey look like? I'd love to hear from you. What do you think makes a public-private partnership truly effective, especially when we're looking at climate resilience, when we're looking at agri-value chains being a bit more sturdier and not get affected by climate change? What would that look like in your experience? And where is the biggest untapped opportunity? What have we not dug into yet? Pun not intended.
Thanks, Sneha. Now, this year's budget also, the reforms expressed did not stop at agriculture. And why do I say so is because of the question which you are asking, that all the stakeholders in the value chain which are there, the growers on one side and the consumers on the other, they are not being linked. And we have a disjointed value chain, lots of inefficiencies built into it, and that is the primary reason that the agriculture, which is employing 46% of the workforce, is providing 17% of the GDP. Now, the question is that whether this value chain, when it is disjointed, is it climate resilient? Disjointed is one thing which has been there throughout the journey of this country. But the climate resilience part, when we see in this value chain, the farmers are suffering. Gayatri has already brought out what are the reasons. There are two monsters, the monsoon and the market. And these two monsters are so unreliable and so unpredictable. Then if we ask 85% of the small and marginal farmers to take care of such kind of challenges, they find it extremely difficult. So what is the solution? The solution lies into what you are asking. Is it possible that all the players in the value chain, there are very large, but I will put them into 4 buckets. The growers on one side, the consumers on the other side, the businesses in between which are connecting the two, and in the environment which they are working, that is provided by government. And these 4 players, if they are coming together, that is what that public-private partnership. The public part is government, the private part is consumers as well as the growers, and the businesses in between. That is the kind of partnership which will reduce the kind of risks which are embedded into this kind of a value chain, which are coming on one side because of the unpredictable nature of the monsoon, or worsened because of the climate variability. On the other hand, the market, which we do not know who is growing what and who is consuming at what stage and in what way we will be able to capture the market. The farmers, when they are growing a crop, at the stage of growing itself, they do not know about the productivity and production which is going to take place, in spite of a crop insurance which is not working. On the other hand, when the crop is coming to the market, they do not know what is the kind of prices which they will be able to secure for it. In a value chain, there is a possibility of having a contract farming. There is a possibility where you have a climate resilient production system where all the players in the value chain are in a win-win situation. The consumers are happy because they are getting a safe food. Farmers are happy that they are having a higher income. The businesses are able to generate the profits for which they are working. And the government is sitting there to look at it in such a system that they are not required to intervene by way of 2 lakh crores of fertilizer subsidy and another 2 lakh crores of the subsidy for food systems. That is the kind of scenario which is there. If you wish to visualize what kind of a value chain can be a win-win situation, please remember Amul. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, sir. I'll move to Anisha because I feel like you're close to the ground in terms of what consumers talk about and are interested in. Your work documents how culture and taste and food shapes choices that people make, and also it includes how aspiration and abundance perhaps sits a little uneasily with climate conversations that can talk about scarcity or loss or restrictions. And I'd be very interested in understanding what, from your perspective, are stories that have been disappearing from India's food culture, especially as choices have evolved. And does any of it, in your perception, link to climate stress at all?
So one of the many research-led stories that we carry came from a writer in Kutch, and she talked about a particular wild grass that people would harvest because it added to their biodiversity within the landscape, but also the diversity of their plate. And it was such a beautiful story because I have the name of the grass here. It's a prickly grass called the baranth grass, and it's protected by a lot of thorns on its stem and on its leaves, and even on the little burr that protects the grain. And the way that they harvest it is that they take a piece of cloth and they gently move it across the grass, and the burr attaches itself to the cloth because of the thorns. And then they carry that home and they harvest it, they pound it, and they release the grain. So the grain is used like rice. It's made with khichdi, it's made into flatbread, or it's made into flour. And now, because it's so labor intensive and there's been a massive move to green the desert, and you have mangoes and pomegranate growing in the Kutch, these kind of grains have been forgotten. And while an older generation remembers it, it was also very labor intensive. The younger generation feels like we have access to colorful diets. We have access to progress, and that's enabled a certain quality of life for them, which of course, which everyone is entitled to a certain quality of life. So we can't deny that. But there is also a conversation around a culture's identity being rooted in its cuisine. And a certain weight that's given to a culture that goes back 5,000-6,000 years, and oral practices and indigenous knowledge that understands the way the land works, the way the soil works in different altitudes and climates and weather. And when we forget that, or we stop harvesting those ingredients, then that knowledge also disappears. Same with millets. I mean, we've been harvesting millets for 6,000 years, but now it's called a climate smart crop. Like we discovered that. But in the Jaintia Hills, for example, there's a song, I think it's called the Long High Song, that the Jaintia women would sing as they harvested it. And because India is reliant so much on oral tradition, which is through riddles and songs and poetry that the women sing, women are largely the custodians of this knowledge. When we stop practicing these food-related customs, or we stop harvesting these particular crops, or knowing what to look for when we forage, then we forget these songs as well, and we forget all the way that the oral traditions have been preserved. And I think there's a significant loss there, not just in terms of identity and culture, but also in terms of the land and knowing how to live in a climate resilient future.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think so many different perspectives, just understanding each of your backgrounds. It's a good way to get started and maybe go deeper into how we look at water, energy, food, and the intensivity of these systems, right? Again, I'll come back to what I love, which is data. And a short data point to anchor or begin, start us off, is a 2022 Global Food Policy Report suggested that climate projections say that Indian crop yields could fall nearly by 25%. And almost 40% of Indians may face water scarcity by 2050. Now, these are real pressures, and that make trade-offs in our food systems very real when we have to make those decisions. And I know you just mentioned climate-smart crops, but I'm actually just going to use that same term again. And the recommendation from these kind of policy reports often is that we must diversify our food basket. So it does talk about indigenous crops, it talks about climate-resilient crops that are good for the soil, maybe things we've forgotten, embracing the way we consume protein. Should it be plant-based? Should we think about fermentation and other innovative approaches? And this is not for only to look at it from a climate perspective, but also thinking about water and energy and how intensive our current systems are as they exist. And that was okay when we didn't have the pressures of climate change. But as we go into the pressures of climate change, what changes as a result? What it does is it reduces withdrawals, it frees up land scarcity, and maybe even thinks about how we can lower systemic exposure to climate shocks. Things that you were mentioning, Gayatri, around the shock of not having a transition from one season to another. So I'll start with you again, Gayatri. I think protein production is one of the most resource-intensive nodes when we look at our current food system. So how do you think India should think about protein diversification, not just as a climate solution, but as a way to reduce the pressure on land and water along with it?
I love this question because it's real. I started increasing my protein, and I really had to think about it. I really had to think about what I'm doing, where is this going to come from? And I have two thoughts along how India should think about protein. The first is local, not national. The minute you put on a national viewfinder, you're standardizing. And we're trying to standardize something that sits on a background that's really diverse. If you think about the climate of North India versus the climate of South India and East and West and Central, they're all very different. So standardizing equals and starts to breathe monoculture. And monoculture, for those who aren't familiar, single culture. History has stark examples of what monocultures do. Look at the Irish potato famine of the 19th century. A single variety of potato was grown, it got diseased, and it led to mass starvation. Look at the Panama banana disease. A single variety of banana, the Gros Michael, fed Europe, the Americas, the Caribbean, up to Thailand even. And that got a disease, and it was wiped out. So monocultures don't work. So let's stop thinking of this protein as a problem where we can put on a national solution. Let's localize it. Let's change our viewfinder. And if you look at local, just Maharashtra, right? Zoom into the fields of Maharashtra. We have tur, urit, mung urit, kulit, chauli, bal, all of these that grow without irrigation. And what I mean by this is farmers, we have this indigenous knowledge of sowing with the leftover monsoon, harmonized with our rice harvest, sowing the next crop of dal. And it's actually a beautiful dance, this relationship. So without irrigation, we have our first source of protein. If you exit the fields and you start to look at the buns, right, around the fields now, we'll see wild sources of protein. You'll find velvet beans, wild cowpeas, the Vigna genus, sword beans. And yes, they take a little processing to make them edible, but this is processing at a home scale, not industrial processing. Zoom out even further and move into the forest environment, and you'll start to see native trees like Bohinia, whose buds have protein, or Oxa, Oroxylum indicum, T2. This long pod, a single pod can feed an entire family. That carries protein. So the point is that protein doesn't necessarily live, the solution of protein cannot be national. We should carry with us a local viewfinder, because every locality has a different season, a different climate, a different soil, and all of these soils have a variety of sources of protein in it. The second point I want us to think about is protein landscapes, not protein isolates. And what I mean by this is protein is not just grams, right? If you take a cup of freshly harvested tur, immature tur, and you compare that with a bar of tofu, they are only 0.5 grams apart. One comes straight from the field, and the other is harvested from the field, soya, traveled to the factory, washed 2 to 3 times, soaked overnight, sent through intense heat, 70 to 80 degrees Celsius, compressed, brined, packaged, and then transported through the cold chain to retail shops before it reaches your home. So gram for gram, they're not very different, but ecologically, massively different. Okay, that's the first point in protein landscapes. Let's also remember protein is a lot more than just whey and soya. Okay, we have a diversity of protein sources, and let's keep that in mind as we start to talk the protein language. We have oil seeds that carry protein. We have native seeds like sabza and amaranth, millets. Even our rice has protein. Our native rice carries protein. And of course, the usual suspects of legumes and pulses and native varieties and land races and forest varieties. The third thought I'd like to leave us with in the protein landscapes is protein is not an isolate. Yeah, protein doesn't exist by itself in the ecosystem, and it doesn't exist by itself in our guts. So yes, it does help strengthen the body. It builds muscle. But without the backdrop of the fiber, without the microbiome, both outside and inside, it's unrooted. It lives in isolation. And finally, there is a cultural knowledge of increasing protein content, right? There's a cultural knowledge we can tap into. We have fermentation practices. I know idli is getting a bad rep, but not idli which is carb heavy, but the old school idli, which had urit in it, right? We also have cultural practices that give us the knowledge of pickling. So let's tap into all of these and think of protein as a landscape, not an isolate. In summary, it's to me, the protein solution is not in a monoculture. It's not looking at it as a standalone something. It's not an isolate. It actually is within the landscape. It's varied, it's multi-layered, it's local, it's rooted.
Thank you. Thanks, Gayatri. And I think you touched upon a little bit of the processing also piece of protein. And I think that's something that people maybe don't think about as often, but a lot of bioavailability when it comes to protein, it's it does require some degree of processing so that it can actually be absorbed and be useful in our gut, as you were saying, to exist and complement the fiber and how we eat it. So on its own, if we ingest protein in a way that is not bioavailable, it's not going to do you much good. So I think understanding the bioavailability of whatever protein that you ingest is equally important, along with making sure that the sources that we consume it from are also right and, as you were saying, ecologically efficient. And I think you also pointed to Maharashtra, right? We've got a diverse amount of dal crops that grow. It's a legume belt in Maharashtra as well. And Maharashtra has also experienced droughts and floods and a lot of distress when it comes to its agriculture, despite, I think, decades of investment in the agricultural landscape. And Dr. Goyal, I'd love to understand from you, from a governance perspective, when we look at state government and how it invests in agriculture, where do you see the greatest structural mismatch when it comes to policy design and what happens on the ground?
So Sneha, you talked about droughts and floods. So droughts have become little less after the climate change, and you have more of rainfall in terms of total quantity and the small space within which they fall. That is something which is becoming more. And you have already mentioned that there is a possibility of reduction in productivity. Now, as far as Maharashtra is concerned, and you must have read even today's newspaper that the government is taking 15,000 crores loan from NABARD, and they want to have more of 150 projects to be completed. More than 200 projects are already incomplete. They want to complete the canal network and so on. 1 lakh crores have already been spent. 1 lakh crores is additional required. And what will happen after that? 30% of Maharashtra under irrigation. The remaining 70% will still remain dry. So it means that that is the direction in which we have to move in. Now, Gayatri talked about, say, can we have pulses? Or can we have those crops which will require less water? We are exporting water every year. How? Because we are exporting out of 150 million ton, 30 million tons of rice. Every kg of rice is 4,000 liters of water. In lieu of that, what we are importing are oil seeds, that is edible oil, 65%, and about 10 to 20% of pulses. Now, why is it so that we are growing those crops in Maharashtra or elsewhere which are requiring more water, whether it is sugarcane or whether it is rice in case of Punjab and Haryana and Western UP and Andhra, and we are importing those crops which require less of water, less of fertilizer, and less emission of greenhouse gases. Why this imbalance? The answer lies into what is that the farmer would earn out of it. A study was done by Professor Gulati from ICRIER, the famous economist. Says a farmer is earning 1 to 2 lakh rupees per hectare in Punjab. You are asking them to do millets, which will fetch only 40,000 rupees to that gentleman. It means in that value chain, there are, when we talk about climate resilience, from the present system to a desired system, there are certain players who are going to lose and there are others who are going to gain. So far, nowhere in the globe we are having a climate resilient system from the present system to a future system where everyone gains. It means that those who are losing, their loss will have to be compensated either by the businesses. The businesses say, why should we? or by consumers. Consumers say, why should we? Or by government, and the government's resources are limited. So the answer to your question is, this is what the government of Maharashtra is trying to do is, with the infusion of technology, is it possible to have a system? Even today, the existing technology in India and in Maharashtra, the average productivity of crop is half of what can be achieved otherwise. So there is enough scope, and that top productivity is also half of what world is producing. It means with the infusion of technology, there is a possibility that we will be able to meet these costs to make it climate resilience, because what I was earning previously while doing a better kind of a crop, say productivity, I will be able to earn more in spite of taking those routes which are more climate resilience. Less of water, maybe less of fertilizer, and so on and so forth. But that gap which is already redundant or lying dormant, which will get started into the system. Why it is not happening? Again, the question, the previous question, since we do not wish to work in value chain system. And what Gayatri says, can we have a localized value chain? Should we always have a global value chain like Amul, 38 lakh farmers? No, it's not necessary. I can have a village level value chain. I can have a regional level value chain. And in that value chain, I can have a resilient value chain. And for that, the last point which I would like to make, we need climate enablers. We need climate warriors. These warriors will not be volunteers. They will not be flourishing only on CSR. They should be business players, because they will be able to generate that income which has not been harvested so far for the farmers or in the value chain. That is the take.
Thank you. And I think you mentioned something really crucial. I feel like one of the things when it comes to crops that are underutilized, because, rice, paddy, we spoke about that, like those take up the majority of the markets and exports. I think understanding for crops that are local, and if we just talk about Maharashtra, whether it's dals or in other parts of India, whether it's millets, what are value additions to that crop that can happen at FPO level? Is there things that we can do so that that can supplement or boost farmer incomes? Can we run programs to make them understand what that journey looks like and what public-private partnership can unearth over there? I think that's something that's of a lot of curiosity to me as well. And I think there's a lot of potential there as well on the public-private partnership side of things. Anisha, you track a lot of how food every day translates between generations, right? How people talk about food. I feel like climate-driven scarcity will alter what is normal today when it comes to food. What we eat today might not be a reality tomorrow. But it is storytelling that will change, whether that's seen as a loss or a new exciting opportunity. Will it be an invitation for us to reimagine how we eat, what we eat, how we do it? What do you think are food practices that will start to feel normal to the next generation that might be unfamiliar to us today?
Great question. Given the space that I'm in, I'm very lucky to be able to take my son along to a lot of things that maybe most people don't even know are happening in the city. For example, I took him to Gayatri's farm. When we go to Goa, I take him to the market with Joanna, our editor, and she will introduce me to little known varieties of rice that you can carry back, or of jaggery, things that are very, very local that maybe people outside that village may not even have access to or know about. And I feel like that, knowing that as a way to experience a culture or a space or a region when you visit will be key to transforming the way that we live every day and the way that we inhabit our spaces every day. And I know that even things that we see as aspirational now, if we are able to change the way that people view that, and what they see as aspirational, I think will cause a significant shift in the way that people consume. For example, if you're looking at, Alaskan salmon versus Nethali off the coast of Kerala, there's a huge impact because you're consuming lower down the aquatic chain there, right? And I think that I can already see those shifts happening because we very intentionally choose to eat, say, red rice from Kerala and not polished basmati white rice. And I think that kind of intentionality that is being brought to the plate, I see it across the tiffin boxes in the classroom. And I know that we are the 1% in the country, but I still find that extremely encouraging because I know that that is going to set what is aspirational as well. So I think we're on the right path. I feel like these conversations do have impact.
Thank you. I think when we talk about these food systems shifts, I think there's a lot of conversations that happens around energy, water, renewables is always in the conversation. Food somehow gets left behind despite it being one of the biggest contributors to emissions. And I think another piece of the conversation that is slowly coming to the table with food is the just transition piece, the power, equity. Who gets to have a say? Whose voice is at the table? How are these decisions made? How are those supply chains affected? And we have seen supply chains around food get affected, whether it's COVID and pandemic risk, or whether it's climatic natural disasters and how crops get affected as well. So we've seen both ends of the spectrum in different ways. I think moving into this section, I'd also want to talk about how there is knowledge within smaller communities. We've been talking about local, and especially Gayatri, you work with local communities, and your place-based knowledge, I would say, shows that there is a lot of resilience in the knowledge that these communities have. How would you say can this knowledge be scaled when it comes to knowing what's climate resilient, what these communities know? How do we ensure that their agency gets granted? Any transitions when it comes to food systems or protein consumption? As we touched upon earlier, they complement but not kind of take over or co-opt. Like, how can those conversations happen? How do we scale it without extracting this community?
A great question again. So I think I always get scared of this word scaling. Okay, and honestly, the indigenous community and the knowledge they hold, it's not floating in isolation. It's not a set of practices that we can just sort of copy paste and then multiply, right? It's an ecosystem. It's a lifestyle, and it's embedded in everything around it. It's really interconnected. So to me, the question is not so much how do we scale this, but more so how do we create the conditions for this knowledge to not just exist but to thrive. And for that, I feel we start with the forests. We start with the landscape. Because the forest, we need to safeguard the forest because the forests hold the diversity. It holds the ancient ecological knowledge of surviving climatic shifts. It holds knowledge of surviving drought, surviving floods, high heat, really cold temperatures. All of this is embedded within the seed bank that exists within the forest. After the forest, we safeguard the people who have the knowledge of the forest, who are the indigenous communities. And these forest-dwelling communities know not just what's edible and what's not edible. They know the season that you'll find that very something. They know where in the forest you'll find it. And they know how to harvest so that you keep it for the next generation and you don't, harvest it out of the forest. Safeguard the landscape, safeguard the forests, and then go to native seeds, because native seeds have genetic knowledge, deep ecological genetic knowledge. And I'll give you two very real examples for me, field observations. I grow two varieties of native rice, Ajra Ghansal and Mahadi. Ajra Ghansal is a rice from Kolhapur district, which gets a lot of rainfall. So in this 20-25 months, 5-month monsoon, Ajra Ghansal lodged like all of the other rice. And it did something incredible. It rerouted at all of its nodes, creating an upward staircase and raising the grain off of the waterlogged soil. No other hybrid does that. Let me take you to Mahadi. Mahadi is a short duration rice. It's a red rice. It's nearly extinct, by the way, because nobody wants to grow it because it's problematic. It lodges. And the cool thing is, compared with all of the other hybrids, which also lodged, hybrids rotted in this excess water. Mahadi, since it always lodges, had created some kind of intelligence of keeping the seed, possibly in its husk, keeping the seed viable through intense water. Intelligence that exists within our native seeds, because our native seeds, if you think about rice, it's the first dated rice is in 7000 BC in India, right? So, and what is a hybrid? A hybrid seed has 3 years of intelligence. It survives 3 years and then you got to go back and get more. So let's safeguard and dip into those native seed banks that we've got, because there's a lot there that we haven't even understood yet. And these are just the 2 rice that I grow that I've observed. I think India used to have 110,000 varieties, but we're down to some 7,000 or 6,000 varieties ever since hybridization came about. So the third is safeguard our native seed. Fourth, we get policy working for us. And policy needs to work with seeds, safeguard seeds, help seed exchanges occur, bring back the sovereignty to the farmers, the seed sovereignty to the farmers. And another very real threat for farmers is industry. Right now, farmers are headbutting against industry, which means if my neighbor becomes industry, 2 things are going to happen. One, it's going to just consume out all of the water. And 2, it's going to start emitting into my air, water, land. And none of us want our food to be growing with heavy metals. So let's get policy working for us. The 5th thing is, if we are starting to look at indigenous foods, we're going to have to start really working on our hyperlocal systems, our networking. Because indigenous foods are real food. They are not built to travel. They are not built to sit in shelves. They are not built to stay for elongated periods of time as if nothing happened. Bugs, fungi, they want your food. So we need to build hyperlocal networks so that consumers and farmers are just closer together. They're not separated, which is the current trend that we see. That's the 5th point. The 6th point I'd like to be raised is the farmers. Farmers are doing 2 things for us. They're growing food, but they're also safeguarding an ecosystem. And this is often forgotten. And there are 2 very real kinds of farming, that's agriculture, that's occurring at the moment. One which is actively degrading our soils, degrading our ecosystem, leaving it starved and making it more water hungry. And 2, which is working really hard to make it healthier for every next generation. And those are the carbon sink farmers. We're not separating these 2, and we need to. We need to reward the farmers that are doing the work more than just farming, the caretakers of the ecosystem, and we need to start penalizing the farmers that are leaving the soils degraded. Let's start paying the farmers. Let's start paying the farmers what they're worth, what the food is worth, so that the farmers we don't see a mass exodus of farmers into the cities, which will leave our lands, our farmlands, agricultural lands barren, which send us back into industrial encroachment and back down that same spiral. And my final point is we need a massive mindset shift. We as a community need to stop thinking fast, more, cheaper, predictable, year-round. And we need to replace this with slow, diverse, truly nourishing, and wholesome, and seasonal, and local. And to me, this is the direction. As always, I keep referring back to the forest because that's, for me, the solution. It's diverse, it's interrelated, it's relational, and it's local.
Thank you.
I'd like to add to what Gayatri said, especially in the space that I am. I see the language surrounding food. And when we talk about, taking care of the planet, for example, the language we use is you should love the planet or do something that's planet friendly and care for the planet. But honestly, that language also has to change. We have to think about incentives, and we have to think about what is the economic value we assign to it, because otherwise nothing is going to change. If we look at India's indigenous camel population, it's dropped by 20%. And that's because people no longer use them for transport. The Raikas don't use them for transport. Slaughter has been banned, so you can't sell the meat and they don't get money from that. And so the camels that we depend on for the preservation of the grassland ecosystem is now reducing. And so we have to find a way to assign, if you assign carbon emissions and there's a cost to it, then we're going to start putting out less of it. And if we're able to incentivize forest systems and the preservation of forest systems for developing countries, and are we able to pay them, those are actual tangible ways that we're able to enable a direction that we want to move towards, right? I come from Bangalore, and there have been some really interesting studies that talk about the degradation of Bangalore's lakes and tanks being connected to the receiving of piped water from the Kaveri. So the minute that we stopped depending on our lakes for water and for fish, we started polluting it, we stopped taking care of it. And I also wanted to talk about when you mentioned going local. There was a beautiful story we ran a couple of years ago about Goa's very specific farmland practices in Goa called the Kazans. And the Kazans grow a particular type of rice variety called the Korgut that is saline resistant. And Kazans are basically the land in Goa, because of the way it's connected through water channels. It brings in ocean water inland. And so the soil has high salinity content. And one of the biggest threats to food security is salination. So imagine, what if we had a rice variety that could actually grow in high saline soil. And guess what? We have it. But because it's not cool and it's not polished and it's not been given the incentives through PDS and through buyback, it's disappearing. Very few villages grow it. Almost, I think, only 30 families now preserve the seeds. So I feel like there are very tangible examples that we can use, that we can learn from and then implement. And one slightly unpopular opinion that we have on Goa is that when we take decisions and choices out of context, it's tantamount to foolishness. So when we look at, for example, veganism from the West and we apply it without context here, and we hold the forest-dwelling Soliga or the Siddhi accountable the way that we hold, say, a New Yorker accountable to meat consumption, it doesn't make sense, because in India, the meat consumption per capita is nowhere near as it is in the West. And when we say free grazing or free range livestock, these are livestock that are actually grazing on our grasslands that help preserve the ecosystem. And so to think that by being vegan, you are helping the environment, I think we have to take a much closer lens to it and examine exactly what that means before we can adopt that practice here.
Yeah, no, I completely appreciate your point. I also, I think I agree with you that we can't obviously compare, how meat is consumed in India to how meat is consumed in New York. I think that would be very unfair to do. But the reality also is that India is on a developmental curve. So the way we are eating is changing. Meat consumption is going up. That is the reality. And if we need to keep up with this demand, that we are seeing in the population outside of the 1%, outside of the people that care. If that demand needs to be met, the only way to actually do it sensibly is through industrialized animal agriculture. Like that's what's happened in the West.
Yeah.
So I think whilst it's really important to keep the framing and have the idea that yes, we don't eat like the West, I think data points to the fact that it is going up. And that's also quite equivalent to any economic development in different countries. Like it does go up. So I think that's where these uncomfortable conversations come in, that if we are seeing the data point to the fact that we are eating differently and that meat is aspirational, people want to indulge, there is clearly something about meat that people enjoy. It's also very cultural. I think the difference is that meat is quite center of plate outside of India, right? So if you look at the Western plate, and we'll come to the plate in our last section, but I'll just touch upon it that meat is very center of plate in the West. But in India, it's a diverse plate. Like meat is one part, it'll be in the form of a curry or it'll be accompanied with rice. So it's not center of plate. And that speaks to why the consumption is also lesser in India. There's religious reasons, cultural reasons, your Tuesday, Saturday, all of that, right? So it's varies. Like India eats meat very, very differently as compared to the rest of the world. But is that rate of consumption going up? Yes. Data very strongly suggests that it is going up. So I think what can we do at the inflection point that we are as a country, where we are going into consuming meat and that is still going up? Where does our own indigenous crops and our knowledge and our local communities and the wisdom that we have, the way we eat, the practices that we have, the food technology, fermentation, all of the things that have been mentioned so far, like how can that really plug into this inflection point that we're at? And just to keep time, I will move to Dr. Goyal. I think I was talking about India's strengths, right? How we eat differently and how our ways of eating are very different. How do you feel we can translate the knowledge that we have in India when it comes to governance networks? So we have very deep local governance networks in India, very institutional in nature. How can we translate that into climate resilient leadership? So what does that mean? How can we have appropriate solutions that are not copying the West, for example? Like they are appropriate for who we are and what we do. And what is something that is a comparative advantage for India? Something that is unique to India and that actually can't be replicated anywhere else because we are unique over here.
Unique to India, 85% small and marginal farmers, 14 crore farmers. Our average land holding 1 hectare. And in Western, you have 1,000 hectares, 800 hectares, 700 hectares. So that is the unique proposition. You said what kind of a local networks. So local networks, you must be reading the results of municipal corporations. You must have read Zilla Parishads. These are the local institutions. But other than that, the most important local institutions, 45,000 farmer producer organizations. And this is a movement which started in 2002, took shape from 2005 onwards. Maharashtra has 1/3 of this 45,000. These are the local farmer producer organizations, average 300 to 500 farmers coming together. Now, can they be the starting point of a food system which is more resilient? Yes. The answer lies in the partnership. Now, whether a housing society in Mumbai would decide that a farmer producer organizations in Nashik would supply everything which I need, that decision that housing society will have to take. This is the kind of food which I require. Why should it travel thousands of kilometers from the north of this country or the south of this country? The Gayatri is talking about local system. The local system can be there, but when there is a consumption, and that consumption will have to take care of our food security. Food security is going to be 2050, 70% more food will be required. Nutritional security, we have got very high population which is malnourished. That is there. At the same time, our climate resilience is there, which is threatened completely because our organic carbon in the soil has gone down from 3% to 0.3%, 0.1%. Our water availability, 5,000 kiloliters per capita, has gone to 1,500. It is going to be 1,100, which will be less than what is sustainable. Greenhouse gas emissions, we already know, you talked about 13.7%, that is for agriculture alone. Food system is 30%. Entire food system, which requires transportation, processing, energy, water, and so on and so forth. 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions in food alone. So in that case, these local organizations will thrive only when the consumers decide that I'm going to consume locally, I'm going to have a relationship with growers, and the businesses become little more responsible, not trying to fleece both of them. The growers on one side, that I will pay you the peanuts, and trying to fleece the consumers on the other side. This cannot be done through CSR. It cannot be done through philanthropy. It has to be done when these players are brought together under a single umbrella. But then who is holding that umbrella? Players are there, umbrella is there, but nobody is holding. So this will require a cadre of people like Gayatri. They will require persons who will be able to bring these players together, not as a charity, but as a business proposition. As I said earlier, you can generate wealth out of it. And that wealth is sufficient because we are underutilized right now. We are highly inefficient globally. We are producing $600 billion of agriculture produce, but our neighbor $1,200 billion, that is China. So if that is the situation, that we should be able to do it together, so localized value chain, which can be managed locally with the help of those who are willing to work as enablers for that kind of a climate resilient value chain, is very much possible. It will be a win-win situation for all those who are the part of that value chain.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goel. And I think you touched upon consumers, right? And I think there's a bunch of consumers in this space over here. So I'll keep it really quick. I just want to do a quick round across all three of you about what we feel like a climate resilient plate of food tomorrow will look like. So there is a lot of growing body of research that says that as we lean into diversifying our crops, whether it's sustaining more abundance or how we do innovation, how we lean into food technology, how we harness microbes, fermentation, look at novel tech that is coming in as well. All of it can reduce pressures on land and water. I want to understand from you, Gayatri, if climate change forced us to relearn how we eat, what's the hardest habit that a modern consumer would need to unlearn? And we'll keep it snappy. Then I'll move on.
The big unlearning. So I'll take you guys to the farm. It's my early years on the farm. There's a papaya tree outside the house that I live in. And it's laden with papaya, and I'm really excited because I love this fruit. I watch the fruit every day. I'm waiting for it to ripen. Takes a long while, okay? 4 months. And finally, I harvest these two fruit. They're both ripe. And seat myself on the steps because I need soil underneath. So the papayas we grow are not, and Karthik will attest to this, they are not the market papayas. They don't have thick skin, they don't have few seeds, and you can't eat them with a fork. They're laden with seed, they have really thin skin, and you have to scoop it, and it will drip juice everywhere. Okay. So I eat this amazing papaya and I'm satiated. And then I'm left with this other papaya. And it's evening and I can't eat anymore. So I think to myself, okay, if I leave it on the kitchen counter, the ants are going to get it. If I leave it outside in the veranda, the rats are going to get it. And suddenly I have a dilemma of more, right? I leave it outside on the veranda, and in the morning I wake up and 2 butterflies are sucking the nectar from this papaya. And the papaya quietly taught me, take what you need, leave the rest. And this is the big unlearning for the modern consumer, right? We have a lot of, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, a lot of more fast, cheap. The conversation is always around yield and productivity and numbers, and nobody's talking nutrition and whole and slow and diverse. And that conversation needs to change. And if you go back to the indigenous knowledge, it's food is not a commodity. It's something relational. It's something that exists where cold exists with flowering, and soil exists with rain, This is the wealth that we're trying to take back. So yeah, my final thought is the big unlearning is not more, not faster, not isolate, and maybe just seasonal and diverse and slow and wholesome. Because climate resilience is not just a set of farming practices, it's also in our consumer choices.
Thank you. I'll ask you, Dr. Goyal, how do you think our future plate will look like, and are there policy shifts that could align what we see sometimes as agricultural surplus? We have surplus in a lot of places, but also we need nutritional outcomes. I think Gayatri mentioned nutrition. So what do you think our future plate will look like, and how will policy align surplus with climate outcomes and nutritional outcomes?
Just give one example. Private PDS, what they call, free, 80 crores, you give it free. What do you give? Wheat and rice. At what cost? At the cost of 4,000 liters per kg, at a cost of greenhouse gas, at a cost of 2 lakh crores subsidy on fertilizer, and another 2 lakh crores on PDS itself. At the same time, the same National Food Security Act says you can also give millets. That was 1 rupee a kg. Wheat was 2 rupees a kg. And rice was 3 rupees a kg. We continue with 2 and 3, but not 1. And those who were fond of taking bhakri, they were asked to take chapati. There is where the policy comes. So it means that if you want to have, and you always being threatened, even if you have a farm laws from Punjab and Haryana and so on, and you keep on under their thumb saying that yes, we are going to purchase 30% of your produce and allow you to continue at a zero cost of electricity, a zero cost of water, and a subsidized rate of fertilizer, which is urea 85%, and they will continue to provide you what is not healthy. So it will come to my plate will become healthier when we are creating an environment in which that healthy products reaches to my plate. And that would again require the kind of a partnership which has to take place between those who are growing and those who are consuming. And the consumers should demand that this is what I require, and the farmers should respond, this is the way you will get it. I can keep on growing nutritional products. If there is no buyers, then tomorrow I will again shift to wheat and rice. And that is something which, in case of food, which is so local, my carbon footprints will be minimal if I grow locally and consume locally. Even in urban, there is a big movement of urban horticulture. urban agriculture. People are willing to grow in their backyard and consume it. Why not do it? If you are bothered about the greenhouse gas emissions, let that be the model in future. And in that case, it is not that the farmers would lose their business, because there will be always some kind of a partnership which can take place. That does not mean that every consumer will be linked to every farmer. No. In between, there has to be organizations. Amul is not connected. Amul is doing 38 lakhs, those who are supplying milk to crores of consumers. Why can't we have the same thing in case of millets, in case of nutritional fruits, vegetables, and so on and so forth? Why not there is a kind of a Reliance pomegranate? Why is it so that our businesses never talk of organizing farmers, bring their healthy produce at the stores of Mumbai? Why can't I have a Devgarh mango supplied to all the avid members here?
Thank you. Why not? Thank you. And last question to you, Anisha. I think, we're here because we care about sustainability. We want to hear about a climate conversation. And I think it's becoming a design language. It gets baked into a lot of these conversations, right from menu labeling to food to climate claims, innovation-driven branding. I'd love to understand from you what your perspective is around how can food writing help build new aspirations without flattening them into greenwashing?
I think if we're always going to be subject to a barrage and different sources of writing and media, and each of them have their own agenda, and we're not able to often tell who's paying whom for what story. And so I think it falls on us as readers and consumers to take a step back and see, are we being influenced by the trends? Are there traditional practices that have been present in our communities that we can look to as an alternate source of information that's verified and true? Because currently millets are trendy, but people and Indians have been farming millets for 6,000 years, and we know that it's a source of all the trendy things that people are talking about, not just protein, but it's got fiber, it's got your macros, it's got your micros. And we've always known this, right? Currently, protein is trendy, but we can already see the shift happening in our algorithms where everyone's talking about fiber now. But what if we looked at how our plates were originally balanced? We always had a balanced diet. And what if we looked at how different communities, the communities that we live in, how they eat? One example that I like to think of is that many tribal and forest communities eat insects. But that means that we have to navigate our own ideas of taste, of delight and disgust, and the ideas of what we think is cool, and then navigate those for ourselves without being influenced by what Instagram thinks is cool, for example.
Well, I'm curious, who do you think people listen to? Do they listen to the chef, the farmer, the scientist, or do they listen to, where are these, there are so many voices. What is important? Science comes with data, the chef comes with culinary and cuisine and indulgence, the farmer comes with wisdom. Who do you think people listen to?
I think people tend to live in an echo chamber, so they just hear more of what they already believe in, or the 2-3 people that they follow. And I think the best thing we can do for ourselves is hear from as many diverse, disagreeing, diverse sources on our feeds, wherever we find our information. I think that's the only service we can do for ourselves right now. Yeah.
Great. So diversity on plates and voices. That's a great way to end that. And we are at time, I believe. Thank you so much for that. And we have about 10 to 15 minutes for some questions. I'll just look around. Yes, sir.
So excellent discussion, among the best I've heard, and superbly moderated. So what I took out, there's a micro level and a macro level to look at the same problem. In micro level, it's self-regulating. In a macro level, you're trying to regulate. So how do we bridge this dichotomy? If I look at it, what Gayatri says is the answer, but that will not work in our modern world. So how do we kind of bridge this or get it? for any of the panelists.
See, if you see micro and macro, I will again come back to Amul. It's a micro level, there is a small society, 100 farmers, they are coming together, they are running a society, it is micro level. And a macro level, you have a giant organization, 1 lakh crore turnover. It's possible. So you can have what Gayatri says, a micro level, provided those who matter in this country and who are running big businesses think that the small players can be my partners. If I decide to grab all the profit of growing, transporting, processing, then it will not work. It has to be a partnership. As I said, under that umbrella, micro institutions should thrive under a protective umbrella of macro player who is not profit driven, but who is driven by a social enterprise.
So there I will just say the cow is milked round the clock. So that is not a good practice either. You're getting it cheaper, but then, so there are many complications within the wheel. Anyway, thank you.
So, time and again, the one example that comes up is milk. We as consumers probably also need to, milk is milk, right? आप दिल्ली में पी लीजिए, मदर डेयरी का पी लीजिए, अमूल का पी लीजिए, किसी का भी पी लीजिए, it's milk. But the consumer is looking for some kind of uniformity, right? वो चावल ऐसा ही होना चाहिए, which, Gayatri, the point that you're making, that the consumer has to accustom to these changes, that every time the rice is not going to be a certain way, a certain texture or a certain fragrance. So somewhere, Amul as an example falls short. It will be good in the future to, this bridge that you also discussed it in the panel. How do we link Gayatri to what Dr. Goyal is saying, right? That is what we are looking at for the future. Milk is one thing, but with produce, if you're talking local, then milk is not a good example. And we need to probably make our discussions broad, and it will be sort of, helpful to hear from you. What are the other factors that would play in if we are to make...
Milk is just an example, but what it does not mean that I cannot have a diversified portfolio. And that diversified portfolio would have those kinds of variations, because if Gayatri says if there are 6,000 varieties, if I am growing 10,000 varieties, yes, 10,000 varieties. I can put a website and say what are the characteristics of each one of them, what are the benefits of that. And that is probably going to be a future as far as consumption is concerned. In that case, you have the entire varieties of the local produce which is available globally. The local cannot remain local that way. But in that case, if we want to avoid the long distance of, let us say, carbon footprints, avoiding long distances, obviously such kind of local produce have a local consumption market because they have been using it. Now in Marathi they call ran bhaji. Now that is something which is locally done. The Gayatri can add to ma'am's question.
I think there's another question.
Yes.
Gayatri, do you have a point? Yeah.
I just have a quick point actually, and I feel the bridge actually is the consumer. The consumer is the one who's going to bridge the gap between this very local discussion and make it macro. And the consumer will do that with their choices, with the knowledge, with the conversations that Anisha says we should have, with being in rooms that make us disagree, and expanding the way we think about our plate.
Thank you. So this is specifically for Anisha. You mentioned about the veganism and the per capita consumption of the New Yorker and the Mumbaiker. So I just wanted to shine a light that even though the per capita consumption of New Yorker might be less, but if you know, India is the second largest exporter of beef, whereas India is the global producer, like the top producer of milk, and milk and beef both consume a lot of water, land and grains, everything. So what do you think in that terms, like what should our ideal diet be? Should it be an animal-based one, which is very high carbon footprint, which has very high carbon footprint, which consumes very much water and uses very much land? Or should it be like the local sattvic, which we already had from years, of the local produce which we should eat? So what do you think it should have ideally?
So this conversation comes from one of our stories called The Ugly Underbelly of Veganism in India, which we still get trolled for. So I love that it's coming up here. But to answer your question, I don't think it's either of those extremes. And I don't believe India eats in either of those extremes. We are a big exporter. Yes, I think that is also a mirror that is being held up to us that nobody wants to look at. And it never crops up in conversations because people want to sidestep that issue. But our plates have always been balanced. It's been a mix of what we grow in our backyards, what we forage, what we are able to get from the forest. And that could be things that we don't think about, like river crabs or snails. And many indigenous communities eat like that. They eat small anchovy fish, which are not the plump surmai that we want to shop for at our local supermarket. But they eat both meat, seafood, forest produce, but very, very local. And that keeps it sustainable, because even when they're harvesting from the forest, they make sure there's enough for the next person to forage from. There's enough for the forest to regenerate. So I think that our traditional practices have a lot to teach us that we can look to that instead of looking at these two extremes.
Thank you. And sorry, just to add on one short thing to that. As you said, we don't consume it at much. We just export it. But even though we are exporting it, we are still using Indian resources, aren't we? Even though it doesn't matter, we consume or a New Yorker consumes, but if it is being grown in India, we are ultimately using our water, our land, our greens, everything from our economy, and then we are just supplying that, So ultimately, the person who is living in India, doesn't matter if they consume it or not, but they are still suffering, because of that.
Definitely. But
by way of taxes.
So we were talking about climate resilience being threatened. We are talking about the soil, the nutrition of the soil, carbon, the carbon content going down, and we're talking about the water available being reduced. I had read that agriculture uses 80% of the water that is available, drinkable water. So I wanted to know, what are your views on vertical farming incorporated within the cities as a additional layer to reduce? We were also talking about carbon emissions, and we're talking about local production. So how does vertical farming fit into this whole equation?
I think you were mentioning the urban farming, right? And I think lots of people are getting into that now.
So the answer is per kg cost of production. If you are able to produce through vertical farming, but using the less resources, the same question which you are saying. If I want to replace meat by a plant-based meat, which is tasting the same, the consumer tastes are met, but environment is not threatened. In your case, you are saying, I am producing vertically, I am having the less damage to the environment, but give me 100 rupees a kg. Who will accept? So in that case, we'll have to go to that technology which is ticking all the boxes. Food security, nutritional security, environmental sustainability, economic opportunity, risk mitigation, and so on and so forth. So these are the parameters of a food system, and you will have to tick all the boxes.
And I think that's where tech is really important and comes into the picture. I think there's one last question, ma'am, from you.
Well, it's not just a question on what you have been talking about, but what the world is facing today. This is about protein. My protein intake, my child's protein intake is just being harped upon endlessly. I remember when we were children, the diet that we ate was very different, in the sense that, we ate, say, dals or chana or chauli or rajma, at a very different level. Today our food plate is very different. It does not focus on that. Children want their what you call pizza, they want their Maggie. And the thing is, the mothers have never told them that, this is not a daily diet. And somehow it is crept into the daily diet. I'm not blaming the mothers. I'm just saying we didn't find a way of encouraging the child to, that this is not daily food.
Yeah.
If this is, I remember I got up in the morning and I went to school early because I had to play. Half an hour, 1 hour. I finished school and I had to play for another hour. But I never was deficient in protein. And it was endless, even in the house, wherever we played. So there was never any deficiency, which has come about today and is being harped upon so much. It is because when we ate at the table, we were given 1 katori of rajma. And then we had another katori of our own choice, So there was a very different way of dealing with food.
I'm sure, ma'am. Thank you. I'm just conscious of time. I'm being looked at.
Thank you so much for listening.
I have to just make sure that we moderate and close off. So thank you very much to the audience. And I hope that we continue these conversations about technology, plant-based eating, away from animal-based products, understanding the true weight and the cost of these things, the hidden cost. And over to Asad for closing.
Thank you all. I mean, this close to dinner, I wonder what you're going to choose to eat after this. But ma'am, you only talked about the mothers. The fathers are also involved in the food choices of the children. And I do tell my daughter to have an egg when she has a Nutella on toast, protein. But thank you for this very illuminating conversation this evening. We explored not only the future of food but and agriculture, but also our cities, communities, and everyday life. Thank you to Dr. Goel, Anisha, Gayatri, and also especially to Sneha. I've got lots of WhatsApps coming up. They've never met such a great moderator in a long time. So thank you for so skillfully steering this conversation. I have to do my normal thank yous. So thank you to Nidhi ji and Shruti from the NGMA, Professor Chenkaluru and Vaidya from the TIFR, Shishir from Project Mumbai, Climate Week, the BMC. Finally, thank you to our audiences for being here. This dialogue continues now at Mumbai Climate Week from the 17th to 19th of February. But for us, it doesn't end here. We are actually going to continue this series on the 25th of March at the iconic TIFR. We will present the next edition of this series, Inventing the Future, India's Climate Innovative Pathways. So do come there if you're interested. You will get all this information if you're following us on Instagram or our website. And we continue tomorrow, actually, with another February programs dedicated to the sacred Sufi evenings. And we have Shubha Mudgalji at the Opera House with a celebration of poetry, love poetry, and Sufi Bhakti traditions. And on the 22nd, we have Sonam Karla doing Songs of the Sacred. So in case any interest, please do join us there. Thank you once again for coming, and have a wonderful, and I'm sure your appetites have increased, so enjoy your dinner too.